What's the closest you've come to death? I overdosed and flatlined twice in the course of 52 minutes, from time found till arrival at hospital. I was Narcaned 3 times through my nose, then EMTS did 45 minutes of chest compressions on way to hospital where I was intubated and had aerosolized Narcan going directly into my lungs. Didn't even know that was a thing. Then they flew in a multi-million-dollar rotoprone bed via helicopter BC. I was brain dead, and they hoped it would bring back brain activity. I was expected to have brain damage and possibly not walk BC how long I was aspirated and without oxygen. I started showing brain activity at hour 22 on the rotoprone bed. I spent the next week in an induced coma, followed by 2 weeks in the ICU. I had to learn to walk again, even which was god-awful. I was told by a doctor who asked me if they could bring 6 medical students in my room to study my chart, that I was a 1 in a million case. Just to survive was insane, let alone to come out with full speech and no brain or heart damage. At that point I had started physical therapy, so they knew I'd walk again. But that was another thing I just got plain lucky on. She said to the students, "My one wish would be to thank the EMTS, who went above and beyond with chest compressions and did everything to keep me alive till I got to the hospital, whose staff I'm also grateful for. But those paramedics saved my ass for real." In conclusion, 0 out of 10 don't recommend. But I did sleep in a coma through my withdrawal symptoms. That was 6 years ago, this last February 15th. Haven't had a slip since. We do change. Elimao ducked my withdrawal by being in a coma. Nice. Gas leak while I was sleeping. Fortunately, my dog realized something wasn't right and woke me up. R.I.P., buddy. You saved my life. Edit. Sorry for the confusing wording. No, he didn't die in the gas leak. He lived a nice long life. He will be waiting for you on the other side. Sounds like one hell of a dog. A sudden anaphylactic reaction to aspirin. My husband drove me to the hospital with his hand down my throat to keep my airway open, and I had to be resuscitated in the emergency room. My family and I overslept and missed our flight out of Miami. It turned out to be ValueJet 582, which tragically became the worst plane crash in Florida's history, with no survivors. About 2 weeks ago, I was walking home along a dark road. I live in the tropical forests of Colombia. I had a headlamp on and was playing some music and singing along to keep myself company. It was an hour-long walk. I reached the halfway point, making sure to keep my eye out for snakes crossing the road, and I hear this rustle in the bushes behind me. I turn around, and I see 2 large glowing eyes and the outline of a feline face about 3 feet off the ground, staring at me, motionless. I realize that I am looking at a jaguar, and I am instantly terrified. I am alone. I am female and rather small. This thing is about 10 to 12 feet away from me, and could easily leap that far to take me out. I have no time to pick up a rock or a stick to defend myself. I do the only thing that my brain is screaming at me to do. I do not run away. I make myself as large as possible, taking on the Tuscan Raider pose, yell as loudly and as gutturally as possible, and charge at the jaguar. The jaguar decides it has miscalculated the threat potential of this prey. I count on the fact that they will avoid a fight that could potentially injure them, as an injury in the jungle could mean that they are unable to hunt and therefore might kill them in the end. It turns tail and takes off into the bush. I know this road. I know perfectly well that it is a farmer's field just beyond the fringe of vegetation that it has retreated into. I also know full well that this is a major predator and that it could very well stalk me along the edge of the road. It takes me a few moments to gain up the courage to turn around, to expose my back. I picked up a bunch of rocks and a stick. I kept making the roars as I made the rest of the petrifying walk back home. I would shine my flashlight into the edge of the forest and back along the road I had been traveling every 5 seconds or so, just looking for those glowing eyes. My foot has blisters on it. I roll my ankle because I am not looking where I am going. I ignore the pain and just keep going. I throw rocks at suspicious-looking shadows, roaring every now and again. It was a harrowing 30-minute walk home. The lights of the town bathe me in their protective light. The dogs guarding their homes shower me with defensive barks, and I feel their presence like shared beacons of life as I find my way to my house, sweating, shaking, grateful to be alive. While mountain climbing, I lost my footing and began sliding down an icy slope, heading straight off a cliff. For a moment, I was certain I was going to die, until my foot miraculously jammed into a crevice, stopping my fall just in time. But I was stuck, and it took a good half-hour to carefully pull myself back to solid ground, knowing that one wrong move could send me over the edge. I remember thinking my odds were, maybe, and probably, going to die today. What surprises me most is that I don't recall feeling fear. Startled at first, sure, but not afraid of dying. Instead, I felt this strange, peaceful calm, knowing I'd lived a decent life. In a way, I even felt lucky, because if that was going to be the end, at least it came with a beautiful view. It was my wedding day. We were getting married in Cape D'Or in Nova Scotia. I couldn't sleep, and I was up early, around 6 a.m., and decided to walk the grounds at the B&B, which also served as a lighthouse, to determine the best place to exchange vows. I was all alone as my husband was sleeping soundly. The tide was coming in. The sun was rising. It was beautiful. Keep in mind, this is backwoods Nova Scotia. There's no guardrails between the nice grassy bluffs and sheer cliffs that plummet hundreds of feet into the ocean with jagged rocks. The grass was covered in the morning dew, and as I walked towards the main point of the land, I slipped. I landed on my back and started slipping. I did what I thought was reasonable and flipped onto my stomach and tried to get as much surface area with the grass as I could. Down and down I slipped, and finally, after what felt like ages, I came to a stop. I looked up and very carefully crawled up the hill. I was literal inches from going over the cliffs. Any more speed, and I would have been toast, and no one would have known for a while until they found my body. I didn't tell my now spouse until we were safely back at home. Crossed the street without looking while drunk, and a car hit the brakes really hard. Passed out in my bathroom while drunk and hit the head on the zinc, woke up with a cut on my forehead. While swimming in the ocean, I got really far out, and the current was really strong. I've never swam so hard to get back to shore. Adrenaline is a crazy thing. I don't think I would have beaten the current if not for an adrenaline rush. Probably when I went to the emergency room with chest pain. I wasn't yet having a heart attack. The heart attack started when I was in an exam room with an ER doc. They rushed me to the stent lab where they opened a blocked artery. The heart attack lasted about 15 minutes, enough to cause some muscle damage, but little enough that I'm still here. Last September 11th, I was sitting in the ER parking lot of the local hospital, debating whether or not I was sick enough to go in. I couldn't breathe very well, so after about an hour, I did. The person who was admitting people took one look at me and got me a room. I didn't leave for 4 days. My oxygen level was between 60%, 65%. I was getting pneumonia, and my organs were starting to shut down. It turns out that I had 4 infections, 2 viral and 2 bacterial. They were asking me about end-of-life care, whether I wanted home oxygen, etc. Even with all of the medicine, I was having trouble with keeping my oxygen level over 90% so they could send me home. I asked them to take the oxygen off for the night, and by morning, I was up to 93% plus. I walked out of the hospital that day under my own power. I have COPD, and my infections were exacerbated by some fires that were burning nearby. And my coworker came to work with a cold that tipped me over the edge and damn near killed me. I had to quit my job eventually and go into a different line of work. I was almost pulled into a brown station wagon by two men when I was 11 years old. If it weren't for the postman walking around the corner at that moment, I would have been gone. Was working security and went into a vacant space that was under construction. The lights were off while me and my boss were navigating around to find them to turn on. My foot hit a huge live wire that was coming out of the floor. The entire vacant space lit up with a purple flash. Thank God for those boots I had on. I was once in the wrong place at the wrong time and got caught in an armed robbery. The gunman pointed the weapon at me before deciding to let me go unharmed, and that moment still haunts me. Almost got into a mid-air plane crash. For context, I fly out of a small untowered airport with a larger towered airport about 6 miles south. I took off in a Cessna the south-facing runway, and after climbing a bit, made a left turn to stay in the traffic pattern. All of a sudden, I get an alert that says, Traffic 12-0, same altitude, and this guy in a Cirrus comes barreling at us full speed, 120 knots shown on FlightAware, underneath our traffic pattern altitude and right over the airport, inbound to the larger airport. Had I not been flying a plane that had the traffic alert system, I would have been dead. It was so close I could see the other pilot and his gray headset. I still have recurring nightmares about it. Last winter, I spun my box truck on a curvy slope, and I landed on a snowbank after delivering goods to a customer. After being stuck for 145 hours, property maintenance guy finally came with Hilux and threw enough dirt under my wheels so I could get free. Before that, he went to look my trucks back and said, "You are one lucky sombitch." When I went to check it out, I went pale, because if those snowbanks hadn't been there, my truck would have gone through a small fence, and after 10 meters going back, there is a steep slope and a 20-millimeter drop straight down to a local ice hall's parking lot with people there. Two things making this even worse was this happened 2 days before Christmas, and the place I delivered the goods was a hospital. Even when I drove there in the spring and summer and now in the fall, I get chills every time, and most likely do anything to skip delivering there in winter. Only comfort I had was my boss going apeshit on the company, whose goods we were delivering as he fought them the whole year, because every place in that city that we deliver stuff is built on a hill. Literally, houses, schools, fucking everything. Car accident. Ejected through the back window and knocked out as a result. When I came to, the car that hit us was resting literally inches from crushing my head as I lay on the back of the car. People who stopped to help thought I was dead. One lady screamed when I moved. I just thanked God that just wasn't my time to go. Driving home and hit a deer and overcorrected, I was 19 at the time, and flipped the car. The car was upside down and sliding. I knew telephone poles were everywhere. I was like, please stop, please stop. It stopped in a ditch, and I crawled out the back window that was broken. It was crazy as everything went super slow. Time had literally slowed completely down in my brain. A nurse drove by, and besides a stiff back, I was good. She told me if I wasn't wearing a seatbelt, I'd been thrown out. Wear your seatbelt? My sister threw a metal swing at me when I was younger. I was rushed to the hospital and was told it was only a couple centimeters away from hitting my temple. If it hit my temple, I definitely would have died. Remember those solar covers on pools that kinda look like bubble wrap? We had one. It was a big pool, My brothers would all swim under that cover from one end of the pool to the other. Thought I could do it too. I was alone, just me. About halfway, I tried to come up for air, but could not lift the cover. After some panic, I started swimming again, and I made it. First grade, we never tried that again. When I was a newborn baby, somebody gave me a cold sore, and my underdeveloped immune system meant this inflated my brain and lungs, nearly killed me. In hospital for a month, left me with a brain scar. Ill-advised 6-car pass on a rural road while riding my motorcycle. I was doing about 110 as I drew even with the last car I was passing, and a big deer leapt across in front of me. I could have touched it if I'd have reached forward. Neither I or the lead car hit it. I momentarily let off the throttle out of shock, but then had to turn it up again, as I had an 18-wheeler coming at me in the oncoming lane. That was probably the closest I've come, that I know of, to actively dying. When I was young, I reached for my toy that had dropped at the deep end of the pool. I didn't know how to swim them. I fell in and blacked out, allegedly. I don't remember anything leading up to my drowning, lol. I remember waking up in the most peaceful state. No thoughts going through my head, and the water was the bluest I've ever seen it. Then once I got pulled up, reality hits, and my lungs were on fire. Non-stop coughing and gasping for air. I wish I could tell that guy that saved me, thank you, again. First time I was riding a bike in the street, a one-lane street, a car was heading at me, and I froze up being the dumb 7-year-old I was. I snapped out of it last second and avoided a collision. When my parents asked me why I froze up, I said my steering wheel wasn't working. Obvious lie. Then they checked it and found out that it was in fact faulty. If you turned it too fast, the steering wheel would turn, but the tire wouldn't. So I probably saved myself from a future accident by almost getting into an accident. A few months after they fixed it, it was starting to get faulty again. That's what you get for 300 plen. I would have straight up died under a car on my way back home from school if the driver on the same exact street didn't slam his brakes. And it wasn't like I was riding in the middle of the road. I was off to the side, but because the steering wheel was faulty, I lost my balance, and while trying to regain it, I lost my balance even more, basically causing the steering wheel to do a 180 as I fell over into the middle of the road. Thanks for watching! Please like and subscribe for more.